Welcome back to BNN News. We often hear about music as a way to express what's missing from words or images, but just as music can be anchored in the sound of speech, it can also evoke something as visual as a person sitting for a portrait. That's what the American composer Virgil Thomson did during the 1920s. Our guest is an advocate and former student of Thomson, who's just recorded his own series of portraits and tributes. He's also a professor at Emerson College. We'd like to welcome Scott Wheeler. Thank you very much for being with us, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, it makes sense that if you were a student of Virgil Thomson, you'd be writing portraits, but you started this way back in, what, the 1970s?
Well, no, I didn't start my portraits then. The works on this CD start as late as the 70s. I worked with Virgil in the 80s, in the early 80s, and he did my portrait. I sat for his portrait, and it's unusual. Composers have done portraits for centuries. They've written pieces that they thought would evoke some particular person that they knew or some person that they didn't know, perhaps. But Virgil, having been in Paris in the 20s, decided the way he wanted to do it was from life, so that you and I would be sitting here and he would write on his music paper the sense that he got of that person and characterize them. So he did me, and he did portraits of lots of my friends, and I got kind of interested in it. He encouraged me to try it, but I was scared, because when you've got somebody there, you're really under pressure, and it's an interesting thing to try to accomplish that. And I had a couple of false starts before I started getting good at it. Virgil referred to it as the discipline of spontaneity. So it's a kind of improvisation.
I remember hearing him, I don't know whether it was live or on the radio, saying that you have this person sitting in front of you, and sometimes you don't feel like you're very enthused. And he says, you're not there to like it. You're there to challenge yourself.
That's true. That's absolutely true. He did say that there were a couple of occasions where he couldn't get a portrait to work, and he gave up. He said usually it was some society lady whose position was largely false. In other words, they were putting up such a front that he couldn't get a real sense of who the person was. I've never had that experience.
Well, talk about the recording, because you have a pianist who also is one of the people I think you use as a subject.
Donald Berman. I didn't actually do a portrait from life of Don, but I did do a tribute piece to Don when he was married. So it's a gift, and it's based on, this CD is both portraits and tributes, and Don's is a tribute, and it's a wedding piece.
And we're going to bring up one of the excerpts from the recording. This is from the end of the clip, Scott. It's a very quiet, almost serene kind of piece. And is there anything you can talk, because these pieces do not sound like caricatures. These are not about surface impressions, I guess.
Oh, well, thank you. That's a great compliment. I appreciate that. No, they're pieces of music. They're serious pieces of music based on some kind of sense of the person.
What about the reactions from people? Because you have them sit for a while, you work on it, and eventually they hear the music. So do they recognize themselves usually? Yeah.
It's interesting. There's a variety of reactions. I didn't recognize myself in Virgil's portrait. Lots of people don't. Many people have recognized themselves in mine, and some say, that's a nice piece, I don't know what to make of it. And that's okay. I think that's probably true of visual artists, too.
Interesting how this fits into your whole work as a composer, because this is not, I would call, cutting-edge avant-garde. I think almost anybody can hear this and immediately get engaged with it. But you do work in theater, so you're very audience-centric in your music.
I work in a lot of different ways. I feel like it's important to be very aware of every avant-garde thing that you could possibly do, and at the same time be as aware as possible of where your audience is and what kind of audience you're looking to reach. It's possible to do both, I think. I hope that I'm always thinking of what's a way to think about music that nobody's thought of before, even in a portrait, even in a tiny piece. What approach could I take that would be a little bit fresh, a little bit unexpected?
Well, what do you do with people? I mean, they don't just sit there. I guess you must talk to them.
No,
you
no,
don't?
they just sit there.
Really?
They're allowed to read. They're allowed to work. I've had people who were artists who were sketching. I've had mostly people read. I had one person who was a video editor. He was editing on headphones and working away. That's Fern Lopez during his portrait. No, I can't talk to them because I'm writing.
Do you see something in your head? Do you picture something usually?
It's not visual.
Not visual.
It's not visual. I listen to something in my head. The idea is to come in with no preconception whatsoever of what I'm going to write, and to sit with the person, and it usually takes several minutes before a musical idea starts to come to me.
Now, I know you've mentioned there are other composers who've done portraits, Elgar, even Couperin back in the 18th century.
Schumann, yes, and no doubt many others have done them that we don't know that they thought of them as portraits. But this particular technique is a delight, is so much fun for me to explore, and has given me a variety of results, which pleases me. The other thing about it, where it relates to my own work, and this is something that Virgil pointed out to me, if you're working in opera, you're creating characterizations musically, and so it's good practice for that.
Of course, it's also interesting how you communicate to people around music, and especially your case with Virgil Thomson. I remember 33 years ago, his portraits were performed. I was at the concert, and at the end of it, a friend of mine went up to him to compliment him on the music, and she realized all of a sudden, as he told her, he had trouble hearing.
Yes. Yes, when I worked with Virgil, he was quite deaf. We could have conversations, but we didn't listen to music together, except when we would go to his concerts, and sometimes he was quite naughty. I remember a very poor performance of some piano music of Virgil's, and he was sitting right in the front row, and the pianist finished off with a great flourish, supposedly had done this wonderful job, and Virgil said, "That was pretty bad." And we all gasped that he would do this, but at his age, he didn't care.
Well, he was also a practiced critic, too. So
he was quite a critic. His way of criticizing in that way, he had a great way. He was famous for sleeping during the concerts that he would review. And somebody complained about that once, and his response was, "Nobody but a fool ever took a second bite out of a bad omelet."
I want to ask you about something that precedes your portraits, and going back to when you were young, playing piano at a restaurant and bar on Martha's Vineyard. I guess you almost instinctually started moving toward that because you're dealing with a live audience and you start spotting regulars.
I do. That was cocktail jazz. As some people call it, previn around. I would previn around. I wasn't a real jazz player, but I could do jazz. I had a bass player and I could improvise, and I played a lot of pop, just whatever pop was around at the time, and a lot of Broadway. And Broadway has always been part of my life. So it was an occasion to bring in as much music of every different kind as I could use on the spot.
And you had to be spontaneous. In other words, sometimes you had to deal with what people wanted. And
of course. And I was accompanying singers. We had singing bartenders and waitresses in this spot. It was called the Seafood Shanty in Edgartown, Massachusetts. I don't think it exists anymore, but I haven't been back to check. So I was for hire. I was absolutely there to do whatever music was called for. And that too is a good training for opera, actually, because as Benjamin Britten said, the requirement of an opera composer is to write whatever kind of music you need for the drama.
Right, or like Shostakovich in the movie theater.
This
is BNN News. We're with Boston area composer Scott Wheeler. Scott, one more thing I do want to ask you. If people want to hear the recording, find out more information about this, you've got some places where they can check that out?
Sure. It's on Bridge Records, a wonderful label out of New York City. and it's, I'm sure, available on Amazon and iTunes and all the places where you buy CDs. We have great distribution.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Composer Scott Wheeler.